All right, here we go. We're in Genesis chapter 6 this morning, and we're going to be looking at a topic that has caused much discussion for the past several thousand years. It's who are the Nephilim, the sons of God and the daughters of men. I tell my kids all the time, I've never had an original thought in my life. I'm not going to start today. And I don't claim to, I'm not going to even try to say that I'm going to resolve this controversy once and for all, because I don't think I'm quite that grand. I may be 7 feet tall, but I'm not that smart. So we're going to start reading it, and I'll just kind of give you an overview of what are some of the views that have been held over time about who the sons of God, the daughters of men, and the Nephilim are, and then I will just kind of lay out where I land on it. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, it's not an issue that anybody needs to divide over. It's not a salvific issue. It doesn't pertain to your salvation. Whether you believe that the Nephilim or this or that or the other really doesn't matter. It's just kind of an interesting topic to study and kind of dig into. It's in the Word of God for a reason. I'm not sure I know what that reason is, but that doesn't mean that there is no reason. It just means that I just don't have it in my head. So let's go ahead. Genesis chapter 6. We'll start in verse 1, and we'll see how far we get. I'm guessing we're probably not going to get terribly far in terms of a verse count, but hopefully you'll learn something today. Now it came about, when men began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. Then Yahweh said, "My spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he also is flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown." All right, so we got these nebulous, these ambiguous characters. We've got these groups of people, the sons of God, the daughters of men, and the Nephilim. So in the Hebrew, I'm probably going to butcher the pronunciation because I am not a Hebrew scholar, but I play one on the internet. Sons of God is Bene Ha Elohim, and which means just literally sons of God. Elohim is God, or gods. If you when it's just left by itself, it literally means gods. But whenever it's used to refer to Yahweh, it is a plural noun used with a singular verb. But here it's just the sons of God. So there are two camps where people fall into when they're trying to figure out who the sons of God are. You got the camp over here which says they're angels, fallen or otherwise, and we'll get into that a little bit. And then you have the camp over here which says that these are basically godly men. So you have, on one hand, you have angels, whether or not they're inhabiting human flesh, like do they enter a human body and then they have physical union with a woman and then produce offspring that way, or are the angels directly consummating relationships, if you will, with women and bearing children that way? Or are they men who are believers, presumably of the Sethite line, descended from Seth, and they were committed to the service of God? So with those who fall into the angels camp, the verses that they turn to support their position, so keep a piece of paper in Genesis chapter 6, because we're going to keep coming back here, but I want you to turn to Job chapter 1. So Job is right in front of the book of Psalms. It's the biggest book of the Bible, right in the middle of your book. So Job. Oop, went too far. Okay. So let's take a look at Job chapter 1, verse 6, which says, "Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before Yahweh, and Satan also came among them. Yahweh said to Satan, 'From where do you come?' Then Satan answered Yahweh and said, 'From roaming about on the earth and walking around on it.' Yahweh said to Satan, 'Have you considered my servant Job? For there was no one on earth, no one like him on all the earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil.'" So you notice what we have here is going on. There comes a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before Yahweh, and Satan also came among them. So what this is generally understood to be a kind of like a heavenly council, like morning roll call. If you ever watch a police show, kind of like the Hill Street Blues or whatever. Oh boy, am I dating myself. Every morning they have a roll call where they come out and they get their assignments and the marching orders, any people that they're looking for that particular day. Basically just coming together, and Christians, we would call this having morning devotions, right? But the police officers have their roll call in the morning, and so all the angels file up, and God's given his orders for the day, and Satan is also with them. So it's a heavenly meeting, right? It's a meeting. It's kind of like a summit in heaven. Then look again at Job chapter 2, verse 1. It says, again, there was a day when the sons of God, Bene Ha Elohim, came to present themselves before Yahweh, and Satan also came among them to present himself before Yahweh. And Yahweh said to Satan, where have you come from? And then Satan answered Yahweh and said, from roaming about on the earth and walking around on it, right? So it's an echo of the first counsel in Job chapter 1. But in both verses, you see sons of God. And then we flip back to Genesis chapter 6. It says, oh, look, this says, the sons of God went into the daughters of men. So it's like, there's a connection there, right? It's the same Hebrew phrase. Turn also to Job 38, verse 7. I'm going to back up and start reading in verse 1 so we get a little bit of context. Then Yahweh answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now gird up your loins like a man, and I will ask you, and you instruct me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who set its measurements, since you know? Or who stretched the line on it? Or what were what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Now clearly this is not talking about humans, because humans were created until day 6. And what God is describing here is the very beginning of the creation process. Like when he laid the foundations of the earth, when the first initial acts of creation in the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth in Genesis 1:1. So these are clearly angels that he's referring to. Now, turn back one book to Psalm 29. Oops, sorry, go forward one book to Psalm 29. Psalm 29. All right, and we'll look at verse 1. It says, ascribe to Yahweh, O sons of the mighty. Ascribe to Yahweh glory and strength. Now, this is the New American Standard, and you see that it says, O sons of the mighty. There's a footnote here that says, or sons of God. So it's Bene Ha Elohim. Interestingly enough, the New Living Translation, I have a New Living Translation downstairs, and it actually says sons of God, which is kind of unusual. I would think that the New Living Translation does, remember we talked about this a few weeks ago on the scale of translations, where you have over here you have like the interlinear translation, which is wooden literal, like word for word, and then just to the right of that you have the New American Standard and the King James and the ESV and some other other versions in here. They aim for more word for word accuracy. The New Living Translation is more on this end of the spectrum, which is more of a thought for thought translation. So you wouldn't expect to see a real rigid adherence to the actual words, like in a word for word sense in the New Living Translation. But in the New Living Translation, they decided to translate it as, O sons of God. So interesting. You never know what you find. You never know what you're going to find until you look. So in Psalm 29, again, ascribe to Yahweh, O sons of God. Ascribe to the Lord, to Yahweh, glory and strength. Ascribe to Yahweh the glory due his name. Worship Yahweh in holy array. So again, Bene Ha Elohim. And then lastly, Psalm 89, verse 6. Verse 6. There it is. For who in the skies is comparable to Yahweh? Who among the sons of the mighty, Bene Ha Elohim, I don't know why I can't get that out, Bene Ha Elohim is like Yahweh. So who among the sons of God is like Yahweh. So who among all the God's angels is like Yahweh himself? Well, clearly the answer is nobody, because God is above all. All angels are created beings, and we'll get into that a little bit. So going back to Genesis 6 now, when we look at this, remember there are two camps, right? There's one camp that says, well, these are fallen angels who are, have had physical relations with women and created the Nephilim. And then, so they use these verses. They use Job 1:6, Job 2:1, Job 38:7, Psalm 29:1, and Psalm 89:6. But in the other camp, they say that these are men who are believers who are committed to the service of God. And for support there, we can go to Deuteronomy. Go over to the right a couple books. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, chapter 14, verse 1. You are the sons of Yahweh your God. You shall not cut yourselves nor shave your forehead for the sake of the dead. So there you go. There's that phrase again in the Hebrew, B'nai Ha Elohim. You are the sons of Yahweh your God. And staying in the book of Deuteronomy 32:5. So clearly that's talking about human beings. Deuteronomy 32:5. They have acted corruptly toward him. They are not his children because of their defect, but are a perverse and crooked generation. And again, in the Hebrew, that same phrase, sons of God, occurs, talking about men who walk with God. Psalms, go back to the book of Psalms, Job, Psalms, Proverbs. Psalms 73:15. 73:15. If I had said, I will speak thus, let me make sure we got this right. Yep. If I had said, I will speak thus, behold, I would have betrayed the generation of your children, the sons of God. And lastly, Hosea 1:10. Hosea is after the book of Daniel, right after the book of Daniel. Hosea 1:10. Oop. Overshot the runway. Here we go. Back up to verse 9. And Yahweh said, name him Lo Ami, for you are not my people, and I am not your God. Verse 10. Yet the number of the sons of Israel will be like the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. And in the place where it is said to them, you are not my people, it will be said to them, you are sons of the living God. B'nai Ha Elohim. All right. So going back to Genesis 6 again, we have angels. Are these guys angels, the sons of God? Because the Job and a couple of the Psalms seem to indicate that. Or are they men who followed God? Now, one thing I want you to take notice is you always have to consider context, right? Remember, in real estate, the three most important things are location, 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 the three L's. When you're reading something, the three most important things are context, context, context. You got the three C's. Part of the context is the genre of the book that you're reading. Both Job and Psalms are considered poetic literature. Psalms are very, very clearly poetic. There are many sections in Job that are poetic, and it's a very poetic. It's part of the genre of poetry in the Old Testament. Job, Psalms, well, Proverbs is considered wisdom literature, and Song of Songs is also poetry. So, who's right? Are these angels? Oh, so sorry, I had a blonde moment there. With regard to the genre, you're talking about Job and Psalms, which are both poetry, but Genesis is historical narrative. So you have to be careful when you're comparing phrases. You can't just say, well, this phrase appears over here in Genesis, therefore it necessarily means the same thing as the same phrase, the same chain of words used in Job and Psalms. So you have to be careful. That doesn't mean they don't mean the same because they come from different genres, but you have to be extra special careful when you're handling the text to make sure that you're treating it according to the genre and according to the immediate context of the words around it, right? So the other passages that I cited for for support that these are actually men who follow God. Deuteronomy is historical narrative. Psalm, again, we went into the poetic literature there, and then Hosea, which was not poetic. It's also historical. It's prophecy, really. So, so we should talk about angels a bit, angels and demons. So we want to think about where demons come from. There are four different camps from my reading. The four different ideas that come out when you start talking about, where do demons come from? What's their genesis? The first view is that demons are spirits of deceased evil people. Spirits of deceased evil people. This is a view that was held by Philo and Josephus and some early Christian writers, as well as the ancient Greeks. So if you were evil, then when you died, you would come back as a demon and you would terrorize people. I guess maybe this is where like haunted houses and stuff like that come from. I do not believe this is a biblical notion, because if you turn to Luke chapter 16, verse 23, we read about the story of the rich man and Lazarus. Notice I didn't call it a parable. I don't believe this is a parable. I believe this is an actual account that Jesus is giving us. But jumping right into the middle of this, we'll start in verse 22 to get a little bit of context. Now the poor man died and was carried away by the angels to Abraham's bosom, and the rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, he lifted up his eyes, being in torment, and saw Abraham far away and Lazarus in his bosom. So you have the rich man and Lazarus. Lazarus was a righteous man, a beggar, who was laid at the gate of the rich man. And the rich man also died. He was a wicked man. And when they died, what happened to them? Well, Lazarus was ushered into Abraham's bosom, and the rich man went where? To Hades, right? So evil people are sent to Hades after they die. They're not sent back to the earth to roam around and terrorize people. They don't become demons. So the story that Jesus tells here clearly falsifies this notion that spirits cannot be deceased evil people. They're just not. The second view of the origin of demons is that spirits, these are spirits of a pre-Adamic race. So pre-Adamic means before Adam, the first man. And this is based on what's commonly called the gap theory. This is I think I've mentioned this before in previous weeks. If you go back to the lessons on Genesis 1, the first few verses, there are those who say that, well, there's a gap between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. And this is where the adherents to the gap theory take millions or billions of years, and they squish them into this little gap, this supposed gap between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. But for numerous reasons, which I don't want to get into here, there's no biblical warrant for this view at all. Not for the gap theory, nor for the idea of a pre-Adamic race or anything like it. There are grammar concerns and other things that mitigate against that view. And plus, when we go to Romans 5:12, Romans chapter 5, verse 12, we read, "Therefore, just as through one man sin entered into the world, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned." So what's he talking about? Paul says, you've got Adam is on the scene. Adam sins, and that brings sin into the world. And sin, the consequences of sin, or the wages of sin, if you will, are death. So the reason why we have sin, and the reason why we have death and pain and suffering and everything else that comes along with it, is because of Adam's sin, not because of some sin of a non-biblical, unbiblical pre-Adamic race. There's no biblical warrant for this view. So they are not spirits of deceased evil people. Demons are not spirits of a pre-Adamic race. The third view is that these are the offspring of angels and women. Notice that I'm saying angels and not demons, right? Angels, we say, are angels who have not left their heavenly position. They have not left they have not broken fellowship with God. They have not sinned. So are demons offspring of angels and women? Some would base this upon Genesis 6:2, which says, again, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. And this having angels marrying women would produce this race of giants. But there's a really big problem with this. First of all, the phrase "took wives for themselves" refers to marriage. It doesn't refer to illicit relationships, if you will. Trying to be careful with my terminology here. It refers to marriage, right? But we learned from Jesus himself, who said in, I don't have the reference written right there. There it is. Matthew 22:30. Check that out. Matthew 22:30. Come on. Come on. There's Luke. Matthew. You see, I don't put bookmarks in my Bible when I'm doing this, so I give you a chance to flip there too. Of course, with your smartphones, you're probably already there and just saying, hurry up, Dan. All right, 22:30. For in the resurrection, they, meaning angels, he's talking about angels, neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like the, back up. Edit that out. For in the resurrection, they, human beings who have been resurrected, neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven, right? So angels do not marry, nor are they given in marriage. So that seems to strongly count against this idea of angels coming down to earth and having physical relations, marrying human wives, and then producing the Nephilim. And there's no indication that Nephilim were demons. There's really nothing in the text. If somebody says the Nephilim were demons, I'm afraid that there's a lot of eisegesis going on. It's when you take ideas that you have and you put them into the text rather than letting the text inform you and put ideas into your head. So there's no indication that Nephilim were demons. They were probably heroes or fierce warriors. So they're not spirits of deceased evil people. They're not spirits of a pre-Adamic race, and they can't be offspring of angels and women. Keep in mind also that the whole idea of an angel is somebody who is a messenger of God. They're special created beings, and they're in complete fellowship with God. So their only desire is to serve Him. And so this would be an act of rebellion for them to leave their place and to come to earth and marry women. That's not their function. And the fourth view is that these are fallen but unconfined angels. Fallen angels, in other words, demons, right? The support for this view comes from the idea that Lucifer rebelled and took about a third of the angels with him, and we read that in Revelation 12, verse 4. Incidentally, the name Lucifer is only found in one place and in one translation of the Bible. It's found in the King James Version in Isaiah 14:12, where the word there is translated Lucifer, but it's only in the King James Version. No other version has that. I'll turn it to, let's see, in Isaiah 14:12. Isaiah 42, 27, 14. Hike. Isaiah 14:12. How you have fallen from heaven, O star of the morning, son of the dawn. Talking about Lucifer there, right? That's where Lucifer comes from in the King James. But it just means light bearer. So the actual Hebrew, the phrase is light bearer. But for some reason, the translators decided to translate that as Lucifer. And that's where we get Lucifer from. Okay, that little rabbit trail aside. And it says, now Lucifer, or Satan, we call him. Satan means accuser. He is the ruler of demons. So if we go to Matthew 12, verse 24, we can see that relationship laid out for us. 12:24, Matthew. But when the Pharisees heard this, they said, this man casts out demons only by Beelzebul, the ruler of the demons. Beelzebul was the ruler of the Lord of the Flies. Another one of their names for Satan. And the phrase "the devil and his angels" is found in Matthew 25:41. Where Jesus says, then he will also say to those on his left, depart from me, accursed ones, into the eternal fire which has been prepared for the devil and his angels. So you see here, interesting side note, that hell was actually originally was created for the devil and his angels. The devil and his angels. So the devil is clearly the head of the angels. And then finally in Revelation 12:7, last book of the Bible. Revelation 12:7. And there was war in heaven, Michael and his angels waging war with the dragon. Dragon is Satan. The dragon and his angels waged war. So Satan is the head of these demons. So we have four views. The spirits are deceased evil people. The spirits, they are the spirits of a pre-Adamic race. Option 3, they are the offspring of angels and women. And option 4, they are fallen but unconfined and angels. Now, why do I say unconfined? Well, because there's a view that says that there are basically two types of angels demons, in the world. There are the free and those that are free and active, like those. Remember when Jesus drove out the demon legion from the man who was in the graveyards and cutting himself and whatever else, and they sent him into the pigs. These are free and active in the world. They terrorize people, and they're seeking whom they may devour, right? And then there are also those who are bound in confinement. There are two types of two categories of confinement. You've got permanent confinement, it seems to be, in 2 Peter 2:4. So turn there. Tell you what, if you had any dust on your Bible before we started class today, if you're trying to turn there with me, we're going to knock all that dust off, because we're going to be jumping all over the place. 2 Peter, no, that's 1 Peter. All right, 2 Peter 2:4, it says, "For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to pits of darkness reserved for judgment," and we'll just stop there because that's the relevant part to what we're talking about. The word hell here is Tartarus, and it's kind of like it's basically a prison. Turn also to Jude verse 6. There's only one chapter. I always make that mistake. It's my trademark mistake. Jude 6. "And angels who did not keep their own domain, but abandoned their proper abode, he has kept in eternal bonds under darkness for the judgment of the great day." So you seem to have these angels who are under permanent bonds, eternal chains, right? And this is where even some, as my late pastor was subscribed to the view that the Nephilim were descendants of demons who had physically interacted with women and produced this super race of people. And he saw in this that angels did not keep their own domain, but abandoned their proper abode, right? They came down to heaven and, had marriage relationships with these women. And he's kept these in eternal bond under darkness for the judgment of the great day. So there are two types of confinement. There's the permanent confinement, eternal chains of darkness. And then there's also those who are confined to the abyss or to the pit. And this seems to be a temporary arrangement. So if you look in Luke chapter 8, verse 31, Luke chapter 8, verse 31, we see here it says, "They were imploring him not to command them to go away into the abyss." Right? This is the when Jesus sent the demons legion into the herd of pigs. Right? Don't send us into the abyss. Don't send us into the pit. And why do we say that this is a temporary arrangement? Because in Revelation 9:2, it seems like the pit is opened and the demons are allowed to come out and wreak havoc on the earth. So Revelation chapter 9, verse 2. "He opened the bottomless pit, and smoke went up out of the pit, like the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by the smoke of the pit. Then out of the smoke came locusts upon the earth, and power was given to them, as scorpions of the earth have power. They were told not to hurt the grass of the earth, nor any green thing, nor any tree, but only the men who did not have the seal of God on their foreheads." Sorry, I should have started in verse 1. "Then the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star from heaven, By the way, angels are often referred to as stars in Scripture. I saw a star from heaven which had fallen to the earth, and the key of the bottomless pit was given to him. So in Luke chapter 8, you see a demon saying, don't cast us into the pit, because they don't want to be locked up for all that time until Revelation chapter 9, when they get to be released and wreak havoc on the earth. So there are 4 views of the origin of demons. So now let's see if we can apply that to Genesis chapter 6. I've already kind of hinted at a lot of this, but we're going to try to put a bow on it to hopefully give you a kind of a little package that you can wrap up and chew on for a little bit. So my position is that these are not likely to be angels. The sons of God that are referred to in Genesis 6 verse 2, I do not believe are angelic beings. And I have 5 reasons why. The first reason is that angels are spirits. Turn to Hebrews chapter 1. Angels, and by extension, of course, demons, right? Because when an angel falls, he doesn't change shape, he just changes his position with respect to God, his relationship. So Hebrews, next is James. For some reason I always have a hard time finding Hebrews. Philemon, Hebrews. Here we go. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 14. He's talking about angels, and he says, "Are they not all ministering spirits sent out to render service for the sake of those who will inherit salvation?" So the author of Hebrews is saying, look, angels are ministering spirits, right? Jesus Christ is placed higher in position above the angels. We are placed a little lower than the angels, but yet the angels were sent to render service to us. This has always perplexed me. It's just a complete side note. If God, we know that God is omniscient, and he's omnipotent, and he's also omnipresent. So why does he employ the use of angels to minister to us? Because clearly he can do it all himself. I've never really grasped that. It's a question that I've had for many years, and I haven't found an answer yet. The only answer I can come up with is apparently that was the perfect way to do it, because God doesn't make mistakes. So angels are spirits. Well, what do we know about spirits? Well, let's turn to Luke chapter 24. Here we go. Luke chapter 24, verse 39. Says, this is when Jesus appears to the 12, right? And he's, the 11. Sorry, Judas has already hung himself. Luke chapter 24, verse 39. "See my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Touch me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have." Wait a minute. A spirit does not have what? A spirit doesn't have flesh and bones. So angels are spirits. A spirit has no flesh. So how is it that a spirit is going to come down, whether it's an angel or a demon? How is a spirit going to come down and have a marriage with a human woman? Because remember, Genesis 6, verse 2 says that the sons of God saw the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose, right? We're talking about marriage relationships, covenant relationships. We're not talking about a fling or an illicit relationship, right? This is not what we're talking about. These are marriages. So angels seem to be immediately disqualified from this. Additionally, we've already covered this verse, but Matthew 22, verse 30, Jesus says that at the resurrection, we will neither marry nor be given in marriage, for we will be like the angels in heaven. So angels do not marry, which stands to reason, because they are not physical, corporeal. They don't have flesh, right? They don't have flesh and bones. So if you don't have flesh and bones, you can't be married to a human wife, and they don't marry at all, Jesus says. So the angels are spirits. Spirits do not have flesh and bones, as you see that Jesus has, and they do not marry, which is the logical consequence of the first point. And 3, the context does not even suggest it, that these are angels. So in the context of Genesis 6, right, in Genesis chapter 5, or let's go back to Genesis, back up a little bit. Genesis chapter 4, we have the account of Cain and Abel, right? Cain slays Abel, and then we have Lamech, bragging about killing a young man and bragging to his two wives. So we got the first instance of polygamy. We've got marriage relationships here, and then we have the descendants of Adam listed in Genesis chapter 5, the line through Seth. So we have, humans all the way through, humans. And then you get to chapter 6. Now it came about when men began to multiply on the face of the land and the daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful. They took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. There's nothing in the context here that would even give us any hint or indication that we're talking about something heavenly or spiritual, right? This is very much on the earth. It's very much about flesh and bones and human beings. Unlike Job chapter 1 and Job chapter 2, where you see the sons of God, the angels, and Satan among them coming before the throne to do morning roll call, if you will. So in the context of Job 1 and 2, you see very clearly, there's a spiritual component. Clearly we're talking about angels, and we don't have any such indication of that kind of context, no contextual clues that would lead us to believe that these are angels in Genesis chapter 6. Let's see, point number 4, big children, if the Nephilim, do not necessitate angelic paternity, right? I would think that maybe I might be an example of that. Neither one of my parents are angels nor demons, right? And just because I'm 7 feet tall doesn't mean I have this kind of superhuman ancestry. There's no indication of that. And plus, there's an additional problem that you run into when you get to Numbers 13:33. Take a look there. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. So Numbers 13, verse 33. There also we saw the Nephilim. The sons of Anak are part of the Nephilim, and we became like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. So wait a minute. Think about this for a minute. If the Nephilim are offspring of angels or demons, I'm speaking of angels in a kind of a broad category. If you have spirit beings who are intermarrying with women and producing these giant super races, right? And then you turn over to Jude 6 and you see that the angels who left their abode were thrown into chains of eternal darkness to be kept there forever. Then you have to ask yourself, wait a minute, how is it that the Nephilim come back in Numbers 13:33 and produce more offspring? Did God miss a few? Did some escape from these eternal chains in Tartarus? It doesn't really add up. You have to answer the question, where do these Nephilim come from in Numbers 13? The Nephilim who were in the land of Canaan, right? So when the 12 spies went out to check out the land, they look and they're like, oh, wow, look, Nephilim. Maybe some of those angels got out. No, they were just giants. They were just abnormally large human beings, much larger than me, by the way. So Goliath, there's no explanation for Goliath. If you want to try to say that, Jude 6, the angels were locked up in eternal chains, so either they were out on parole or they escaped and produced additional races, the superhuman race. And if it happened again, then you might expect it to happen again. So, like, do we have superhuman races now? No. Apparently there's a province of China where people like Yao Ming come from, where there are lots of really, really tall people. But still, I think they pale in comparison to what the Bible describes as to, Goliath's height. It was like 8 or 9 feet tall, right? That dude was huge. So there's no real support for this idea. You have to answer how the Nephilim returned and populated the land of Canaan. So angels are spirits. Spirits do not have flesh and bones. They do not marry. The context in Genesis chapter 6 doesn't support any kind of spiritual realm thing going on here. And then in point 4, is that big children don't necessarily mean that you've got any kind of angelic ancestry. And 5, if they are fallen angels, they would not have been called the sons of God. This seems to be hopefully rather obvious, right? If you're a fallen angel, you're not considered a son of God, right? Even Jesus, when he was speaking to the Pharisees and the Sadducees, when he was walking the earth, he says, you are not, they're like, we're children of God. And he says, no, you're children of your father, the devil, right? So those who do not do God's will, those who do not walk in his light, those who do not accept his son, cannot be called sons of God. That's just not a biblical phrase. So you can't say that a demon came down to earth and they were called sons of God. It just doesn't work. So it seems to me that those who say that these are angels are pretty much hemmed in on every side. And there's not a lot of wiggle room for this theory. I just don't think it holds a whole lot of water. So who are they then? If they're not angels, they're not demons, they're not ancestors of, they're not deceased evil people, and they're not spirits of some pre-Adamic race, who are they? Well, I think the option that's left to us is that they're just men. They're just ordinary men. And whether or not they were, they were godly, the one explanation I've read is that they're godly men from the line of Seth. Now, does this necessarily mean that all descendants of Cain were evil and all descendants of Seth were godly? Well, no, I don't think so. I don't think you necessarily even have to make that assertion. Remember that in the book of Hebrews, the author there is talking about we are descendants of Abraham if we are like him in his faith, right? So we are children of Abraham if we believed as Abraham did. So the Bible doesn't seem to be nearly so concerned in this regard with physical ancestry as it is with your spiritual ancestry. So it's entirely possible, even though I am not descended, to the best of my knowledge, I'm not descended from any one of the 12 Hebrew tribes. I am a child of Abraham by faith. That does not mean that does not make me Jewish. Even I don't think I have one single drop of Israeli blood in me. But I am a child of Abraham by God's declaration because of the faith that he has given me to trust in him. So in that sense, I am a child of God. I am from the lineage of Abraham because I believed as he did. So whether or not you say godly men from the line of Seth, it does not necessarily mean physical ancestry. I think it's probably referring more to spiritual ancestry. And I think there's good support for this too. And the daughters of men, I think we're from the line of Cain, whether they were physical, again, not necessarily physical ancestry, but spiritual ancestry. They're unbelievers. So you have godly men marrying unbelieving wives. Now, wait a minute. This rings some bells. So as my late pastor used to say, whenever you come into the scripture, you've got to concentrate and connect. Concentrate on the verses that you're reading and think about how that relates to the other verses in the Bible, because the Bible fits together like a jigsaw puzzle really well. Let's turn to Deuteronomy chapter 7. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy comes from two Greek words, deutero and nomos. Deutero means second, and nomos means law. So you've heard of autonomous, like the autonomous zone in Capitol Hill and here in the Seattle area. Autonomous means autos is self, and nomos means law, so self-law. Deutero and nomos means second law. It's the second telling of the law when Moses got his second set of tablets. So the first telling of the law was in Exodus chapter 20. In Deuteronomy, we have the second telling of the law, right before Moses died and before they entered the promised land. So Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 3 and 4. God gives this command. Furthermore, you shall not intermarry with them, the Canaanites, in the land that they're getting ready to possess. You shall not intermarry with them. You shall not give your daughters to their sons, nor shall you take their daughters for your sons. Why? Well, he's about to tell you. Verse 4. For the women that The women of these ungodly people that you're getting ready to take over, they will turn your sons away from following me to serve other gods. Then the anger of Yahweh will be kindled against you, and he will quickly destroy you. So what's he telling us? He's saying, look, you're going to go into the land. Do not intermarry with the people of this land. Why? Is it because God is xenophobic? No, it's because of their relationship with him, or sorry, their lack of relationship with him. Has nothing to do with their skin color, has nothing to do with their culture, unless you want to consider their religion is their culture. It's all about their belief system. And he says, if you intermarry with them, they are going to lead you astray. Concentrate and connect. Exodus 34. Turn back a book. 2 books. Second book of the Bible. Exodus chapter 34, verses 14 through 16. Probably should have read this one first, sorry. 34, 14 to 16. I'm going to start in verse 13. I don't want to start in the middle of a sentence. But rather, you are to tear down their altars and smash their sacred pillars and cut down their Asherim, the Asherah poles. For you shall not worship any other god, for Yahweh, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. Otherwise, you might make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, and they would play the harlot with their gods and sacrifice to their gods, and someone might invite you to eat of his sacrifice. And you might take some of his daughters for your sons, and his daughters might play the harlot with their gods, and cause your sons also to play the harlot with their gods. Notice the language that he's using here. Worshiping other gods, worshiping gods other than Yahweh, it's adultery. It's spiritual adultery. You're playing the harlot with other gods. So God says, look, when you go into the land, do not intermarry with them. Why? Because they will lead you astray. They will lead you basically to the gates of hell. They will lead you away from God. And of course, we have no better example in Scripture, in all of Scripture, than Solomon. 1 Kings, chapter 11. My man Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, but he forgot his own. He ignored some of his own wisdom. Let's start in verse 1. Now King Solomon loved many foreign women along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women, from the nations concerning which Yahweh had said to the sons of Israel, you shall not associate with them, nor shall they associate with you, for they will surely turn your heart away after their gods. Solomon held fast to these in love. He had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned his heart astray. For when Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart away after other gods, and his heart was not wholly devoted to Yahweh his God, as the heart of David his father had been. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the detestable idol of the Ammonites. Solomon did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh and did not follow Yahweh fully, as David his father had done. And then it goes on to talk about Solomon building high places and temples for all of his wives so they could worship their own gods. So we see here a stern warning from God. It says, do not intermarry with them because they will lead your heart astray. But wait a minute, you might be saying. This really sounds like xenophobia. God is just saying you can't intermarry with people who aren't like you. I've actually heard people try to use this as a justification for saying, well, you can't marry, white people don't marry black people don't marry white people. You stay within your race, right? This is clearly not the case. Moses married a wife from, where was she from? I suddenly just drew a blank. Moses married a woman who was from Northern Africa, most likely black, and Miriam and Aaron made fun of him because of it, and God was not exactly pleased with that. So Moses married a dark-skinned woman. Moses himself was, Jewish, so he's probably olive-skinned, so he wasn't exactly like a pale face like me. Where's the book of Ruth? The book of Ruth. If you look at Ruth, let's see if I can find it real quick. I'm having a real hard time finding things this morning. This is what happens when you get to be old and blonde and an ex-athlete. Ruth, why am I having a hard time with this? Hang on. I was looking at it just last night. Oh, snap, crackle, and pop. And if I can't find it in about 12.2 seconds, then I'm going to pull the plug on it, and I'll just give you an executive summary on it. Joshua, Judges, Ruth. There we go. Judges, Ruth. All right, Ruth. Sorry about that, folks. All right. The book of Ruth. Remember what happens in the book of Ruth. This gal named Ruth is the daughter-in-law of Naomi. So Naomi has a couple sons, and both of the sons are killed, as well as her own husband. And then when Naomi is, she's an older woman, and she's like saying to Ruth, Ruth and her sister-in-law, what's her name? Whatever, it's not important. Ruth's sister-in-law, so Naomi gets her two daughters-in-law together, and she says, look, go back to where you came from, and go find yourself a husband, because you're not going to get another husband from me, because I'm too old. And so they both initially resist, and they say, no, we'll stay with you. And then eventually one of the daughters-in-law, not Ruth, says, okay, she goes away and she does her own thing. She goes back to her people. But what does Ruth say? Now remember, Ruth was a Moabitess. Now Moab was one of the people groups that God said, do not intermarry with them. Don't even associate with them. Don't do this, because they're going to lead your heart astray. But what happens in the book of Ruth? Chapter 1, we'll start in verse 14. And they lifted up their voices and wept again, and Orpah, that's the name of the other gal, kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. So Orpah said, okay, I'll see you later. It's been nice knowing you. And then she said, behold, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. But Ruth said, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from following you. For where you go, I will go. And where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people. And here's the important part. Your God will be my God. Wow. So what happened here? And as you know, if you continue to read in the book of Ruth, Ruth eventually marries her kinsman redeemer. Oh man, brain fart again. Boaz. Ruth marries Boaz, and Ruth and Boaz become the grandparents of whom? David. So here you have a Moabitess marrying a Hebrew, and this relationship seems to be blessed. How do we know it's blessed? Well, she becomes part of the lineage of Christ. So is the important thing the nation that you come from? No, it's not. The nation you come from is not what matters to God. He doesn't care what geographical boundaries you were born in, where you dwell. What he cares about is who is your God? Who is your source of moral authority? We have here a Moabitess who says, your people will be my people. She became a Jew. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. So, how did I get on that? I don't know. I'll have to rewind it and watch it again. But what's not important is where you come from. What matters is who you worship. So, I think what we have here is the sons of God in Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 5 or whatever. These are godly men. These are men who worshiped God, but yet they married women who led their hearts astray. It's the same thing we see throughout Scripture, and especially culminating in the person of Solomon. So I think that's the most reasonable explanation for who the sons of God are. The Nephilim were just mighty warriors. They were men of great renown, right? These were mighty men who were of old, men of renown. So they were known for doing some pretty amazing things. We're not told exactly what those things are, but there you have it. All right, so that is the end of our time. It is 9:58, and we have left off in verse So we got through 4 verses in 1 hour. That's pretty good. So we will stop there. I'll stop recording now, and then